Slave. To be a slave is to be owned by another person, classified as property, who is forced to work for nothing. A chattel slave, Chattel, is a person who is owned forever and whose children are automatically enslaved. This was made legal by the European governments. Slavery has been around for a long time, but since I have a little Portuguese in me, we're going to talk about the Portuguese I know done it. In 1441, Antelo Gonzalez and Nuno Tristillo, which I'm sure I pronounced it wrong, captured 12 Africans in Mauritia and took them to Portugal as slaves. And then I'm just going to do a bunch of series of dates and some names and stuff, not anything in particular, but just give you a background because I don't know too much about black slavery because I don't have any relatives I've been able to trace back to that. But I do have some Native American slaves. Okay. 8/8/1444. Lancarote Freitas. He was a tax collector. He kidnapped 235 Africans in Lagos and brought them to Europe for slavery. June 18, 1452, the sugar slave complex is when sugar was planted in Madeira, and African slaves were put to work on the sugar plantation for the first time. Pope Nicholas V issued a Dum Divers authorizing any non-Christians to the status of slavery. January 8, 1454, Pope Nicholas V issued a Romulus Pontifex, which means Portugal has a monopoly in trade with Africa. So Spanish began to bring Africans to Spain. January 4, 1492, Grenada surrenders to the Spanish forces of the Catholic kings. So there were slaves on both sides. So Ferdinand and Isabella gained the slaves from the surrender. October 12, 1492, of course, Columbus takes the 6 native slaves back to Spain for king and queen and parade them through the streets. June 6, 1496, he returned, and on the second voyage, he took 30 Native American slaves, and I'm not sure how many his brother Diego took. April 27, 1500, Pedro Cabral of Portugal landed in Brazil. That doctrine of discovery, which you talked about earlier. 1509, Diego Colin complains that the Native Americans do not work hard enough, so he began transporting African slaves. August 13, 1521, Hernan Cortez captures King Cuauhtemoc in Mexico, and they become under Spanish rule. Another one of those doctrine of discovery. And then I'm going to just skip around. 1556, Geneva, Italy wanted to prevent trading slaves not because it was wrong, because they wanted to reduce the amount of Africans that were coming into their city. In October 10, 1562, John Hawkins began trading slaves illegally with the Spanish colonies, which caused tension with England and Spain. 1571, France declared slavery illegal for the same reason Italy did, or opposed it. July 27, 1585, Sir Walter Raleigh tried to set up the first English colony, but it was unsuccessful. 1592, Bernard Aerts became the first Dutch slave trader. July 11, 1596, Queen Elizabeth gave the German slave trader Caspar van Zetten slaves for payment for duties performed. The Germans now joined in. 1601, the first sugar mill was built in Brazil. 5/14/1607, of course, Jamestown in the British colony was formed. 1612, unofficially settlement in the British colony in Bermuda. The British settled in Bermuda. 1617, the first records of slaves, even though there were slaves before then, this is the first record of them. May 14, 1625, John Powell landed in Barbados, claims that island for the King James I. 1632, Montserrat, land claimed by Christopher Columbus for Spain, but in 1493 it fell to the English control. February 25th, 1644, slaves in New York, but then it was called New Amsterdam. And in 1657, George Fox, a Quaker, wrote a letter to his friends letting them know that he had native and black slaves. 1671, George Fox and William Edmondson visited Barbados. They wanted to convert the people to Christianity there. 1672, the Royal Adventures Company was founded in 1660, and then it was reconstructed to the Royal African Company, which is the English's major slave trading organization well up into the 1730s. 1689, John Locke publishes Two Treaties of Government, which offers justification for slavery. October 23rd, 1696, Philadelphia Quakers did not want any more slaves in their town either. 1795, New York did not want any blacks any longer either. Even if you had black blood in your veins, you were not allowed in New York. 1794, French Republic abolished slavery, but Napoleon revoked it in 1802. It was abolished again in 1815, but didn't go into effect until 1826. And it was abolished in the colonies in 1848 for the French Republic. 1802, slavery was abolished in Ohio by the Constitution. January 5th, 1804, they enacted the Black Codes, which restricted free blacks even through Ohio. Even though Ohio was considered a free state, they came up with these Black Codes. One of the codes is you had to pay a $500 bond just to pass through Ohio, and if you wanted to stay, you had to present a certificate of freedom and had to register the children, which cost 12.5 cents a name, and anyone helping blacks would be fined $1,000. Now, the black laws were passed on state and local levels. They were declared by the Ohio Constitutional Convention, which they met in private to develop these laws, and it trickled down to the United States. And what basically it did, it restricted the civil rights and civil liberties of blacks, in particular former slaves. The reason the laws were implemented at this time, they stated when statehood was formed, they only had a few blacks then, so they didn't have a need for discriminatory legislation at the time. Some of the laws were the blacks couldn't vote, they couldn't be hired, they couldn't testify against whites, they couldn't join the militia, and the list goes on. January 25th, 1807, they decided to make some stricter laws, and which remained into effect in 1866. Now, in 1807, British had abolished the slave trade, but theirs did not go into effect until 1833, after British government paid $20 million to compensate families that owned slaves, so they would abolish slavery because of the lost property. Slavery was a major source of wealth for the British Empire and the United States. I don't know why my hand is shaking. 1833, while Britain began shipping an indentured service to supplement the shortage of laborers they had in Trinidad, they first started with the Chinese and the West Africans and the Portuguese, and they were proven inadequate, and then they supplemented them by the Indians from India. United States and the islands supplemented their shortage by blackbirding, which is a coercion of people through trickery and kidnapping to work as laborers. One of the famous blackbirders is from Cleveland, Ohio. His name is William Henry Hayes. He was notorious until his murder March 31st, 1877. Okay, 1846, here comes convict leasing, which is still in effect today, I am told, which is renting prisoners to industries and companies, which made John T. Miller very wealthy. He treated the prisoners worse than he treated slaves. So, December 6, 1865, the United States officially abolished slavery. 1867, the convict leasing was considered illegal, so the people were falsely accused to keep the prisoners full. So local whites would pay the courts and the court costs, and then they would take control of them after they paid them bills. 1870 came sharecropping and tenant farming, and which allows tenants Landowners allowed tenants to use the land for the share of crops they produced. The difference between tenant farming and sharecroppers. The tenant farming had their own equipment, where the sharecroppers did not. And since they didn't have a place to live and sleep, the landowners would rent out to them, and then which basically kept them in debt because they never could pay. In 1876, the pig laws came, which were mostly enforced in Mississippi. If you were black and unemployed and you stole a pig to eat, you were charged $10 and served 5 to 10 years in jail. They had lots of laws and statutes, vagrant statutes of that nature that would just put blacks in jail for no reason. And if you couldn't afford to pay the fine, you were put in jail also. Even if you married someone from another race, that was against the law. And then 1877, the Jim Crow laws came, which are different from the Black Code laws. Jim Crow laws are just basically segregation, where they didn't want you to mingle directly or share the same facilities as white people. You were segregated. You couldn't use the same bathroom, different water fountains, stuff like that. And then 1901, convict leasing changed, and it became the name as debt servitude, where you were forced to sign contracts to pay off your debt. Private prisons increased, and the trickery remained. It's one of the reasons why police force is disrespected today, is because of the convict leasing.